Greetings, my name is Randy Kitchur, and I'm a relatively well-known exopolitics researcher, UFO disclosure political activist, and a UFO close encounter experiencer going back to August of 1981. I'm also the spokesman and the webmaster for the Interdimensional Angels website. Just simply Google Interdimensional Angels and you'll find us at the two top search returns at the top of your page. Today I'm here with a retired Air Force officer by the name of Stan Fulham. He's written a remarkable book called The Challenges of Change. The book deals with the UFO and alien phenomena like no other book has ever dealt with before. He's dealing also in his book with issues such as Earth changes, the environmental crisis, international terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, specifically focusing on Al-Qaeda, as well as the looming financial and economic worldwide meltdown. People have called Challenges of Change one of the most compelling and fascinating and interesting and challenging books they've ever read in their life. Today the book is in the hands of the Russian embassy and the foreign ministry, and it's being read by hundreds of officials in the Russian government. I'm pleased to have Stan Fulham here with me today. Stan, welcome. First off, Stan, my understanding is that your exposure to the UFO and alien phenomena began with your time in the military. Could you tell us a bit about your military background?
Yes, I served in the Air Force during the war and with Bomber Command. I was shot down on a bombing raid over Germany in November 1943, and then I spent the rest of the war in various prison camps.
Now, you had some experiences with UFOs while you were there. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was in Stanley 357, which is a prison camp for Allied airmen near Torun in Poland. On a hot July day in 1944, somebody rushed into the barracks yelling, "There's a rocket up in the sky." So we all rushed out to see what this was all about. And it was a rocket about 20,000 feet, a bright red rocket. And I'd say flying at very fast speed. It had no wings and it made no sound. So we knew from our training in aircraft recognition that this was no aircraft. But we thought it was probably a German rocket, because the Germans then had the V-1 and V-2 rockets which they were using against England. However, until somebody remarked, is that, well, it's flying from east to west, so obviously it's not a German rocket. And the Russians didn't have the technology, rocket technology at that time. But never for a moment did we think that it were associated with the alien phenomena or spacecraft. And of course, years later, we realized we had witnessed a UFO.
Now, Foo Fighters, they're often reported during World War II. Do you have any experience with Foo Fighters?
No, I was with Bomber Command. We flew at night, and we never saw any Foo Fighters. And well, we saw lights, like searchlights and that sort of thing. I talked to a couple of crews who said that they had seen some strange lights, but they could have been mistaken for night fighters. So that was a very rare incident.
So they're more of a daylight phenomenon, the Foo Fighters?
Yes, there were several fighter pilots in our prison camp. One of them was Ron. He was a Spitfire pilot who told me about his experience. He was on a sortie over France, and he said suddenly these two Foo Fighters approached his aircraft and flew alongside each wingtip with him, in formation with him, for several minutes. He was very, very nervous because he never had this experience before. He had never heard about him either. And he says, but after a while he relaxed because they took no offensive action against his Spitfire. When he returned to the squadron, he reported the incident to the debriefing officer. And he was telling me about the reaction of the debriefing officer, who looked up at the ceiling with a silly smirk on his face in total disbelief of what this 19-year-old pilot was telling him. So Ron said that he had a similar experience with Foo Fighters on 2 other occasions after that, but he never again reported them to the squadron. So as you see, is that the what do I say,
ridicule,
incredibility, and the cynicism and this sort of thing, and dealing with the UFO phenomenon goes right to the very start.
Okay. So did you remain with the Air Force after the war?
No, I attended university for several years, and then I was on a merchant ship for a couple of years, and I worked for British United Press, and then I returned to the permanent Air Force.
Oh, so when you returned to flying duties?
No, I returned as a fighter controller with NORAD. Now, a fighter controller basically works functions within the radar sites that are all around North America. But a fighter controller's principal job is to direct and control the jet fighters onto the enemy bombers, because we track them on our radar scope. We can see them. Jet fighters can't see the bombers until they get close enough to see them.
Mm-hmm. Now, from all the reports I read, NORAD had thousands and thousands of reports of UFOs that have never been released to the public. What was your experience there?
Yes, I was reporting for duty as the duty controller one night at the radar base, and the officer I was replacing told me, pointed out that there were two UFOs that hovered about 1,000 feet up, about 2 miles away. They were large, 2 to 3 times the size of our aircraft, and they had a series of lights around the periphery of their framework. So I scrambled a couple of the standby fighters, the jets. And no sooner were they airborne than the UFOs streaked away at terrific speed, and then stopped several miles west of Vancouver over the Pacific Ocean and just sat there until the jets approached them, and then they flew away over the Pacific. Now, the next morning, the base commander called, and he said, he was getting calls from the media. And he said, but as you know, about these strange lights, but as you know, there was nothing unusual happened last night. So there is no reason for us to be speaking to the media. Now, I understood. That was the policy under an agreement signed between the United States and Canada in 1956, which controlled the dissemination of information relating to UFOs, because they obviously didn't want to panic the public and whatever other reasons they had. And so that's where it stayed. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe that policy has ever been changed.
Now, did NORAD ever send somebody down to debrief you here?
Yeah. So they were very interested in the incident, and so we met, the squadron commander, myself, and the technical officer met with NORAD officers, and we discussed the incident. They were pleased with what I had done. There was no criticism of that. Mm-hmm. What they were trying to do is refine the reporting procedure, so to get more definite information about the aircraft, the spacecraft, and this sort of thing. So that's